freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this great land of ours, this is Dr. George Simon welcoming you to another edition of Character Matters, the program that I believe addresses what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, and that is the character crisis that we face in America. And we don't just face this crisis here, we face it in a lot of places, but it is a problem that is threatening the freedoms that we enjoy. Our founders knew that this great experiment in freedom would only work if we had individuals of character who had their own principles to live by, principles that enabled them to not only fend for themselves, but to relate to one another in a responsible way, and thereby permit us to enjoy the maximum degree of freedom to pursue our own dreams and to fulfill our own purpose on this great planet. And that dream is now threatened in many respects because we have so many individuals, unfortunately, who, although they understand what the rules of fair play are, and although they understand what it would take to be responsible in this life, many times, unfortunately, they are not of a mind to do so, and as a result, they abuse the freedoms that we enjoy, and that invites our government to try to solve the problem by passing restrictive laws that only burden those who are already responsible among us, burden those folks even more, and also threaten the very freedoms that we have enjoyed for so long. So I'm on a kind of a personal mission, and that mission is to inspire folks to take notice, pay attention to the character crisis that we face, and to do their part, each person doing their own part, to make this world a better place by living up to the ideals that many of us profess, and to be the kind of people that we can be, so that we can all enjoy the blessings of freedom now and for ages to come. And that's my mission, and that's really at the bottom line in all of my work, all of my books, my psychology books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, which is an international bestseller, and the definitive guide to understanding and dealing with those folks who are benign appearing on the surface, but who can be ever so difficult under the surface to deal with, and who always seem to end up getting the better of you. The people who make you feel crazy, you know there's something wrong with them, but they have you somehow feeling that there's something wrong with you. So that's why I wrote In Sheep's Clothing, and I think that's why it enjoys such widespread popularity, not just here in the United States, but in many different countries and foreign languages. And also my other book, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, which is a more in-depth study of the character problems that we face. It's a more in-depth study of the various character disturbances that we see these days. Not all disturbances rise to the level of character disorders, but Character Disturbance is a book that is a primer, basically, that gives average person some insight into the nature of the kinds of character disturbances that are very prevalent in our culture, and what to look out for, and how to deal with these problems. And then my third book, The Judas Syndrome, is about faith that can really save. It's meant for the Christian faith community, and it's about not talking the talk of being saved, but walking the walk of doing as we profess. Doing as we profess on our lips, from our heart, and into action, so that we are not only the best that we can be, but so that others are also attracted to us and transformed at the same time. We can change the world one heart and mind at a time, and it has to begin with us. And so that's the thrust of my work. I also blog at www.manipulative-people.com. That's manipulative-people.com. I have a post that posts every Friday on a timely topic, and this last post, this past Friday, is a continuation of a series on the personalities, the characters, the disturbed characters who are most prone to abuse in relationships. And we're going to be talking about that today. As a matter of fact, that's going to be a subject that we're going to be covering in depth over the next few weeks, and culminating in an interview with a wonderful woman by the name of Barbara Roberts, who is a blogger also, and is part of the organization Cry for Justice. And I'll be giving more information about that. We're going to have that interview. Ms. Roberts is herself a survivor and an advocate, and she has some very good things to say about what it really takes to empower yourself and get out from under an abusive relationship. So we'll be having that interview. I haven't decided exactly what day that would air. It will either be a week or two from now, or it will be the first Sunday weekend after Labor Day in September. It depends on when we can get all the editing done. We need to get some editing done on the interview, and maybe a few supplemental things added to the interview, and then it will be ready for broadcast. So we'll have that interview for you, and I'll announce the date at least a week or so in advance and on my blog. I also write for another blog counselingresource.com. That's counseling with two L's, by the way, because it's a British-based blog. I have many articles on that blog that you might find interesting as well. And you can also visit my website, drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon.com. Well, as promised, tonight we're going to talk about abusive relationships, and I'm going to expand a little bit on the post that I put on my blog, manipulative-people.com, this past Friday. The title of that blog, in case you're interested in the title of the post, if you're Google searching, the title of that post is Abusive Relationships from Disregard to Dominance. And it's a continuation of a series. It has to do with the difference between, shall we say, your garden variety narcissists, folks in relationships who feel entitled and who don't much care about the rights and needs of others. They're so self-absorbed, they're so selfish, they're so egocentric, they're so egomaniacal, and they're so full of feelings of entitlement that they do as they please with complete disregard for others. But there are some narcissistic folks who go beyond disregard. This is the group of folks that I call in my books, In Sheep's Clothing and Character Disturbance, the aggressive personalities. And there are some subtypes of these personalities. We'll be talking about them all today. And these personalities are among the most prone to more serious abuse in relationships. And that's because they go beyond mere disregard for the rights and needs of others. These folks wantonly violate the rights and needs of others because they're determined to dominate in relationships. And they're determined to have what they want at all costs. And we'll talk more about that. And I know that there are likely to be folks in the listening audience who have experience with any of these folks, with several of these folks, maybe the various subtypes I'll be talking about tonight. And I invite you to call in, ask a question if you will, make a comment on any of the blog articles, make a comment on anything in the books, ask a question on any of the things that I've written, either on the blogs or in my books, or share an experience or two. So the number to call if you want to join the conversation, once again, is 718-717-8296. We'll be happy to take your call. Let me talk just a little bit about this post from this past Friday. I focused a lot of attention on one of the aggressive personality subtypes. And by the way, I should qualify and clarify a little bit first about what I'm talking about when I use the term aggressive personality. You know, fortunately, most human aggression is not violent. So when I use the term aggressive, I am not talking about aggression that is necessarily violent. Some aggression is violent. And we'll talk about that in just a bit. But not all aggression is violent. Aggression is that forceful energy that we expend to get the things we want. Pure and simply, it's fighting. It's fighting for the things that we want. And human beings do an awful lot of that. We're kind of wired to do that. It's second to our nature. And when we fight for the things that we want, and we fight with principle, and we fight with restraint, and we fight with discipline and with care not to needlessly trample on the rights and needs of others. When we fight conscientiously and in good principle, in a principled way, when we do that, we appropriately call that behavior assertive behavior. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, that's the healthiest behavior we can have. So when I'm talking about aggressive behavior, I'm not talking about violent behavior necessarily, and I'm not talking about assertive behavior either. What I'm talking about is the kind of unscrupulous fighting that some personalities are prone to do. And I see we have a call coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and patch that through. Hello and welcome to Character Matters. Hello?
Yes, is there a broadcast?
Yes, welcome to Character Matters.
Am I supposed to do something?
You go ahead with your question.
Oh, I thought this was just a broadcast that I could dial into and listen.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is the number to call if you want to either ask a question or if you want to share an experience.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't understand.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You can go to the website and listen.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Well, yes, so if you want to join the conversation, if you have a story you want to share, or you have a question you want to ask, once again, the number to call is 718-717-8296. And if you want to tune in online, all you have to do is go to ucy.tv. That's UCY, the letters U, C, and Y.tv. You can click on the link for Character Matters if you wish, or just click on UCY TV, and you should be able to hear the broadcast on any wireless device you have or any internet-connected device you have. We stream worldwide on the World Wide Web at UCY TV. UCY.tv.com. We were talking a little bit about the difference between assertive and aggressive behavior. And I was talking about the fact that aggressive personalities fight in unprincipled ways. Not necessarily violently, but they don't fight in a principled way. In other words, they don't fight for good reason. We have another call coming in. I'm going to take that. Hello and welcome to Character Matters.
Hi, I have a quick question, and then I want to take this off the air.
Okay, thank you.
You often speak about character-impaired people lacking empathy.
Yes.
And I was just curious if it's possible for these people to develop empathy and what ways there are for them, or is it just something you have to learn to live with?
Wow, what a great question. Do you mind hanging on for just a little bit while I address that? Because I have a follow-up question I'd like to ask you.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, great. What a great question. Because I actually get asked this a lot of the time, and I actually, in my professional career, have set up programs for various different populations of character disturbed people, some very seriously character disturbed. I have set up programs that include components for empathy training. And one thing I've learned is that in certain cases, with certain individuals, with certain characters, and with certain populations, there's actually merit to these programs. There's actually merit to a formalized system of empathy training. And this is training that can't just be done within the confines of the treatment program. It has to be carried out in vivo, which means out in the real world after the person's out of treatment and in follow-up or aftercare. It has to be a kind of ongoing development thing. But then there are also individuals who do not seem to profit from empathy training. As a matter of fact, there is a small group of individuals, a small group of psychopathic individuals, who the research tells us actually become more cunning and dangerous predators when you try to give them empathy training. Now, this seems a little odd, so I'll explain how this works. What happens in empathy training is you basically try to teach the person what it is that another person is going through when they're on the receiving end of some kind of abusive treatment. So, when certain individuals who have no capacity for empathy, and therefore you can't cultivate it in them because the empathy capacity is totally lacking. Their brains are wired in such a way that they don't even have the capacity to develop it. Well, when you teach these folks too much about how empathy works, then they learn too much about the vulnerability of decent folks, and that enables them to become more stealthful, more skilled, and more dangerous predators. Does that make sense?
Sort of. So what you're saying is that then in some of these cases it's the way their brains are wired, and there's nothing you can really do about it.
That's right. In some cases. And the real trick is to know what you're dealing with, and that's why I was going to follow up with you. I was curious about what prompted your question, whether you were dealing with some kind of first-hand experience with someone who appeared to lack empathy.
Well, it's kind of a stretch because I've heard some of the ideas you've proposed, and after a while, they just sort of clicked with me. They just sort of resonated with me, and suddenly it just, I had a new understanding of some of the concepts you were describing. So I thought maybe this might be a similar situation with people who lack empathy. Is once they get the concept, maybe they start to develop it.
Yeah. Well, there are fortunately, truly psychopathic people are rare. They're a rare phenomenon. So those individuals who lack even the capacity for empathy, they are relatively rare. There are, however, and this is the point, one of the main points that I make in all my writings, especially in my book, Character Disturbance, and that is that character disturbance exists along a continuum or a spectrum. We've learned this now about the autistic disorders, It's not, we can't put people in discrete pigeonholes. There's a continuum. And there are some autistic individuals who are fully autistic, and there are some individuals at the opposite end who have just a smidgen of the autistic tendencies. And if they're bright enough and they're schooled well enough and the intervention is done early enough, some of these folks can function almost normally. So there's a broad spectrum there, and that's the way it is with character disturbance. And so there are individuals who have impaired empathy, but perhaps they can learn it. Perhaps they didn't get enough empathy development in their upbringing. Perhaps they weren't taught well enough. Perhaps they have a diminished capacity, but not a totally absent capacity. And therefore they can benefit from some empathy training and development. So it really depends, and it really has to be an astute, careful, comprehensive diagnostic assessment on the part of the clinician treating to be able to tell whether or not the person is going to benefit from that training. So I hope I've answered your question there.
Yeah, for the most part. Thank you.
You're certainly welcome, and thanks for the question. Great question. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye. What a great question that was. And in one of the later programs in this series, when we're talking about aggressive personalities and we're talking about the more serious subtypes, I'll be devoting one entire program to the psychopathic individuals and to the other individuals who are at the far end of the spectrum of character disturbance, the most severely impaired characters. So we'll be talking about them in one of the programs toward the end of this series, so you won't want to miss that. Back to my statement about the kinds of unscrupulous fighting that aggressive personalities of all types do. They kind of go through life like palookas. I know this is an old term, it dates me. Excuse me, folks, but I'm 66 years old, so some of my vocabulary comes out of a different time and age, and maybe some of you folks have never heard that term before, but a palooka refers to, as a matter of fact, there used to be a bubble gum by the name of, a brand by the name of Palooka Joe. I don't know if anybody out there can relate to that or remembers that. But a palooka is a basically not very smart fighter, physical fighter, a boxer who swings wildly and indiscriminately and doesn't really cultivate the art of boxing, and therefore may land a few blows sometimes, but often gets knocked on their keister sometimes too, because they're just too wild and too undisciplined in their fighting. That's what a palooka is. Well, aggressive personalities, like bulls in a china shop, this is how they go through life. Life for them is a contest. Life for them is a contest in which they must emerge the victor. And they see everyone or everything in life as potential obstacles in the way to their goals. And they want to break down all the barriers and remove all the obstacles to the things they want. And they do that in a most aggressive way. If they were to do that in a way that was respectful of the rights and needs of others, if they were to do that in a disciplined way, then we would call them assertive personalities and there would be no problem. But aggressive personalities don't respect boundaries, they don't respect limits, they don't operate on principle, and they don't pay due heed to others and to others' needs or rights. And so they go through life like palookas, swinging wildly, so to speak, getting what they want by hook or by crook, never taking no for an answer, never stopping short when they should stop short, never giving pause when they should give pause. You've seen these aggressive drivers. You've seen them on the road, whereby that 1 second they're going to save seems like so precious to them as they're weaving in and out of lanes. There's one car that maybe is going 2 miles an hour under the speed limit, and they just can't stand it. And you're in the other lane, and you give just barely enough room between your lane and the car in front of you in the other lane, and they cut right in that space, and then they weave through the next car because they're determined to shave off that 2 seconds. And you may see them at the next light on the road. They had to stop just like you did, and maybe they gained 20 feet by their weaving in and out, but they're going to still beat you to their destination by about 0.5 seconds. And that's how aggressive personalities go through life. Everything is a contest. They have to win, and they're going to do it by hook or by crook, and they don't pay attention to the rules, and they don't pay attention to the limits, and they don't pay attention to the rights and needs of others. They don't give adequate caution, and they don't seem to have what we call adaptive fearfulness. In other words, they don't hesitate. They don't give pause. They don't have enough qualms of conscience, enough hesitation, enough adaptive fearfulness to step back and say, wait a minute, what am I doing here? It's full speed ahead. It's pedal to the metal, full throttle, full speed ahead. This is how they go through life. And there are several subtypes of these aggressive personalities, and I blogged about one of the types, the type that I call the unbridled aggressive, this past Friday. And you can read the post. And these folks are the folks who tend to be the most abusive in their relationships. And as I talk a little bit more about the unbridled aggressive, and if you have questions about it, or questions about the post or this topic in general, or if you have something to share that you think would be for the benefit of our listening audience, give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 717-8296. But the unbridled aggressive personality, this is a really interesting personality. This is one of the 5 aggressive personality subtypes that I outline in my writings. Now, this is my definition. This is my categorization or classification of a personality type, a disturbed personality type, in severe form, a personality or character disorder. And this type is, the reason I call it the unbridled type, the unbridled aggressive type, is this is the person who respects absolutely no boundaries, limits, or rules. In other words, everything is fair game. These are the folks that have it's a me against the rest of the world kind of mentality, and they have to come out the victor on top, and they'll do it by any means necessary and with no regard for the rules that it takes to live in a civilized society. And it's more than just a disregard of the rules. These folks are actively at war with the rules most of the time. In other words, they pit themselves against you, against others, against the system in general, against the society in general, against the rules of society in general. And it's because they pit themselves against that traditionally we have called these folks in professional literature, we have called these folks antisocial personalities. Anti meaning against. Antisocial meaning against society, against the social order. Now, I often hear people, even clinicians, use the term antisocial inappropriately. I hear people use that term to describe folks who are being socially aloof or who are not being friendly. This is a horrible misuse of the term antisocial. A person is not being antisocial when they don't want to sit with you at lunch. That's not being antisocial. That may be asocial, or that might be aloof, or that might be being uncooperative, but it's not being antisocial. Antisocial has a specific connotation of being against society, against the social order, pitting oneself against the system, against you, against anyone or anything that stands in the way of what they want. And there are personalities like that, and they start out early. These folks start out early in life. They are really living hell to raise. They are living hell to raise. They are ill-tempered. They have a short fuse. They have a low frustration tolerance, a low tolerance for anything that unnerves them, and they are just excessively ready to fight. Always willing to pitch a fit, basically, when they don't get their way. They will have their way, by gosh. Strong-willed, ill-tempered, uninhibited, no brakes, poor brakes. Once they get going, very hard to put the brakes on. In my 2 books, I talk about intervening with such personalities, and I use the analogy of a train on a mountainside at the top of the mountainside that's beginning its descent down the steep slope, but it has no brakes, or it has weak brakes. And if you are ever going to stop that train, if you're ever going to arrest it in its tracks, you better do so when it first begins to roll, because by the time it gains some momentum, there's no stopping it. And that's how it is with these folks. Once they get rolling, once they get going on their tear, you are not going to arrest them. And when they're growing up, this is the secret of discipline with these folks. For all you parents out there who have one of these extremely willful, headstrong children who taxes you to no end because they fight so hard for the things they want, and they have such impatience and such short fuse, and they're so irascible in their temperament that just about anything sets them off. Remember this. Always intervene in those first crucial seconds when they just get that motor running. Don't wait. Don't tell them 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 times that some consequence is going to be coming if they don't stop. It has to be lightning fast. When it comes to these kinds of personalities, the only thing that can help save them from turning into unsavory brutes when they get older is to intervene quickly, firmly, swiftly, and with a consequence that has enough teeth in it to really arrest their behavior. Nothing could be as important as this. I really urge parents. I know there are parents out there who have these children, and maybe they have taxed them to their wits' end. Maybe they've tried to get them help, maybe to no avail. I'm telling you, the secret is don't let that train get rolling. I talk about this in depth in Character Disturbance, and I give examples. And I also have a series on my blog site on manipulative-people.com, and also on the counselingresource.com website on the aggressive personalities. Good series to read that will explain to you why this is so crucial in character formation. Always intervene early. And for those of you who are in relationships, adult relationships with disturbed characters who have aggressive personality predispositions, or who have one of the aggressive personality subtypes, the same thing. Don't let the ball get rolling. Many times people in relationships with these kinds of personalities, they try to take and take and take as much as they can until they can't take it anymore. This is actually the wrong approach. This is the wrong approach. This only reinforces the aggressive pattern. If you're going to confront and deal with a person's disrespectful behavior, abusive behavior, it's got to be dealt with at the very first sign. At the very first instance, as soon as that talk starts getting out of hand. You don't wait until things are said that you'll truly both regret. The time to walk away, the time to set a limit, is when it first begins to get out of hand. Send the message early, send it then. This engagement is over unless it can be appropriate. That's really, really important. But in unbridled aggressive personalities, the kinds of folks we have called antisocial in the professional literature, these folks are always in trouble, and they are also the most prone to abuse in relationship, including physical abuse. These palookas go through life like everything that they want is theirs for the taking by hook or by crook or by force if they wish. And they respect no boundaries, no limits, no rules, no rights of others. They take what they want. And if they don't get what they want, they get ticked. And there's some sort of hell to pay. This is also an important thing to realize. You know, many of these folks get referred to anger management programs. And I'll tell you what a fallacy in many of these programs is, especially when it comes to these aggressive personalities. The model for anger management is simple. And by the way, this is an interesting fact. My book, In Sheep's Clothing, addresses this whole phenomenon only briefly. But believe it or not, my book, In Sheep's Clothing, is the #1 bestseller on Amazon in the category of anger management. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that what I propose about anger management programs and their weaknesses and what these kinds of personalities really need resonates with so many people that folks who have been in anger management or folks that have referred someone to anger management and have only been frustrated with the results know that in my books I present a framework that's a much more helpful resource. And let me set this framework up for you so you understand what it is that I try to put across here. The model for anger management is that somebody gets angry first, and that's why they lash out. And if they could only learn to manage their anger better, they wouldn't lash out. But my point in my book about aggressive personalities is that it's the aggression itself, it's the aggressive style of these individuals that's the problem. And most of the time, that aggressive style is not violent. In other words, most of the time, the fighting these folks do is simply fighting for the things that they want from you or from others, or things they want to take from society without respect for the rules or without respect for the rights and needs of others. So they'll fight for the things they want, and it's when they get denied or they get interfered with or they encounter resistance, that's when they get mad. They're already in the fighting mode to start with, which is the problem. And it's when interference comes that they get really ticked off. That road rage develops in the aggressive driver when they're weaving through traffic, they're weaving through lanes, trying to get where they want to go 5 seconds faster than you, and then they encounter some little old lady going 25 miles an hour. That's when they have their road rage. They encounter some new resistance. You know, they've been successfully dodging through, finding little openings between lanes, zigzagging between, and so long as they've got an open highway or they've been able to do that successfully, they're happy. But they're still they're already aggressing. They're already in the fighting mode. And when they encounter resistance is when they go ballistic. That's when they get really ticked. And that's when, in turn, that added anger exacerbates their aggression, and they can even become violent. So this is a problem with the anger management models, and it's why so many of the aggressive personality types that go into treatment don't get completely well. It's not that the programs are totally flawed. They're not. Some of the premises on which they're based are good, but they don't take into account the character of these individuals who generally go into these programs, and they don't take into account that many times these folks are already in the aggressive mode of behavior long before they get angry. And sometimes people aggress, and we'll be talking about this in a later program. There are individuals who aggress even when they're not angry. This is what predatory aggression is all about. This is aggression purely based in desire, not in anger. Predatory aggressors are not angry people. They're just determined to get the better of you. They just want to exploit you, take advantage of you. It makes them feel good to do that. I know, it's hard to imagine, but that's the way they are. There are people just like that. And so that's an important thing to remember. Now, in my blog post, I talk about the fact that people who get into relationships of any kind with these unbridled aggressive characters, they could and they should expect just about anything in their relationships. For the life of me, I have never figured out why anyone would be attracted to these unbridled aggressives. Because, frankly, because they are so overt, and because they are so unbridled, everything is on the surface with these folks. There's no rocket science to them. Anybody ought to be able to pick up on their aggressive style in the way they deal with life. And why anyone wants to have anything to do with them, I don't know. In my experience, I have found 3 groups of people attracted to them. One group is individuals who are so impaired in character themselves. In other words, they're kind of like mind, but just not quite as bad. And therefore, they connect with something familiar, and they don't take into consideration that they could still be hurt, because even though they're a little bit like their more aggressive counterpart, they could still get severely abused or Are we on again?
No, I cannot hear you.
Okay,
Online.
I think we just tried to log in again.
Okay.
So maybe you can try again.
Yeah, I will try again, but I also would have a question. Could I ask you a question, please?
Sure, certainly, please do.
I have a very close relative who has a very aggressive personality, but then on the other side, sometimes when when there are other people around, the character suddenly changes. Towards the husband, she is at times very. I think now it's working again because I hear a little bit. I always have to turn it down, otherwise there's an echo, and I don't. Anyway, I want to continue with my question. Recently, I just challenged that relative, and I said, this is not helping. I just thought, and I was. When she started to put her husband down, basically I said, that is not helpful, that is not helpful. And suddenly it clicked, and she changed her attitude. And she realized what she did. And I thought that was very good, because this is an elderly couple, and on the other side, sometimes you shouldn't even intervene in these situations, but then I thought I finally had it, and so I intervened. And that's what I did, and it worked. I raised more awareness. Sometimes it's like, I think you understand what I want to say, right?
I do, but can you give, for our listeners' benefit, can you give an example?
Yes, I can. I can give you an example. Actually, the husband fell, and then the wife was so upset about it that she called him names, and sometimes she just challenges him too much, which I think is very disrespectful, and he laughs then and doesn't know what to do, and she gets then even more aggressive, and then when it's inside of the society of different people, she's very respectful suddenly. So it's like almost, I just don't like this at all.
So you make the point here very well that aggression is not necessarily violent, and something happens. Something happens. She gets upset and she lashes out, and it doesn't have to be violently.
Yes.
But she lashes out nonetheless. Yes.
Yes, very much so, and to a point that is very disrespectful, and that is then. And now I realize what type of personality that is. It's aggressive personality.
Yeah, and that's the key point. The key point is that that these folks have this aggressive style about them in life, where everything basically is a fight, and it doesn't have to be a physical fight. It's just that their approach to life is aggressive, and when things don't go their way, they lash out, and they do so without any respect for the rights or needs of others.
Yeah, and that's what I have observed, and then I thought, should I intervene, should I not intervene? And I'm starting to intervene because I think you have to fight for the rights of the one that is hurt. Yeah.
Well, I thank you for sharing that example. That's a really good point. I'm glad to have somebody provide that example, because I think many times we don't really understand these aggressive personalities, and I'm going to be talking about all the different subtypes. Especially, next week we're going to be focusing a little bit on the channeled aggressive personality. This is a person who's really heck to work for, really hell to work for, or to live with, who obeys most of the general rules, most of the big rules, but their style is so aggressive that they're literally tyrants, either at the office or in their own home. We'll be talking about them in the next program.
That will be very interesting again. I love your program. So.
Well, thank you so very much, and thanks for calling in, and great example. Thanks for sharing it.
Thank you very much as well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, now, as we're approaching the last few minutes of the program, I want to kind of wrap up just a little bit here. I was saying earlier that these unbridled aggressives, because they're so openly aggressive in their style and because they're so at war with all the rules and all the limits, these are the folks that spend an awful lot of time behind bars because they've never met a rule that they didn't like to break. And because of that, they often get caught, get punished, get sanctioned. And the sad truth of it is that because that style doesn't get dampened many times, that time that they serve behind bars doesn't really teach them anything, and it doesn't really deter them in their style. And they come out just as determined. As a matter of fact, many times they come out determined to be more tactful, perhaps, in their fighting, so that they don't get caught, perhaps, or maybe they just don't care. Many of these folks who make the revolving door recognize that they can learn to habituate, they can learn to adjust to the environment, even behind bars, and it doesn't bother them so much. So they're willing to come back, and they don't dampen their style. And they go in and out and in and out, and folks keep hoping they will change, and they don't. And rarely, when they're in some facility, rarely do they get the kind of confrontation about their style in some kind of intensive treatment that they would need to be different people. So we'll continue this discussion about aggressive personalities. Check out my blog at manipulative-people.com. Check out my books on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com or your bookstore. And we'll join you again next week on Character Matters for another great discussion. And pretty soon we'll be having a great interview with one of the leading advocates in survival.